The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has been out for more than half a year now, and despite Nintendo claiming that the timeline placement of this game will be easy to discern once you play the game, fans, lore analyzers, and theorists alike have found themselves in a conundrum over where in the Zelda timeline Breath of the Wild can fit. And despite what some people believe is cold hard factual evidence of where it is, don't worry MatPat, I've got my eyes on you. I'll deal with your claims soon enough. The fact is that Breath of the Wild's timeline placement is and shall remain a mystery until Nintendo comes forward and confirms which timeline it takes place in, as there is an absurd amount of clashing information in Breath of the Wild that keeps it from having a concrete placement in any one of the timelines. While personally I advocate for the child timeline, I can't ignore the fact that there is evidence that clashes against it, while at the same time there is a grand amount that supports it, along with other timelines. But geez, Downfall timeline supporters are hella rabid. They will rip your face off if you simply disagree with them. Thanks for feeding the frenzy, Mr. Patrick. So before I kick off the timeline struggle videos on Breath of the Wild, I feel this video is extremely important that I've been working on for some time, until I had to slightly rework it in light of the Game Theorists' video on the subject and Hurricane Irma. Whether you like it or not, Matt's influence is a reality that does force adjustments on other creators when covering a similar topic. Hey guys, it's HMK, and you're in for a treat when it comes to Breath of the Wild and the evidence of its placement in the Zelda timeline. Be sure to hit that like, subscribe to the channel, and share this among with all your Zelda legions, confused or otherwise. This video aims to cover all the evidence of the timeline placements within and around Breath of the Wild, so you guys get a clear understanding of the debacle around this game's place in the Zelda timeline, and why it can, but doesn't fit in any timeline branch in an undisputable manner. First, we need to get the facts out of the way. As confirmed by both longtime Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma and Breath of the Wild director Hidemaro Fujibarashi, the facts are 1. Breath of the Wild does take place after Ocarina of Time, and 2 is that Breath of the Wild takes place as the last game currently in whatever timeline it truly does take place in. Really helpful there, guys. To be fair, they further stated that they love to see us theorize and speculate on the game's true placement. They must really like watching us squirm. There is a lot of cherry picking when it comes to advocating for a specific timeline placement, but we gotta look at all the facts, no matter how much they clash and disprove your favorite timeline. Alright, now let's get on to the good stuff. The supporting and clashing evidence for all timeline possibilities: adult, child, and downfall. With that being said, we're not only going to look at what's found in Breath of the Wild, but what exists in games within each timeline that would advocate or go against Breath of the Wild being in the respective timelines. Now the first thing I want to get out of the way is definitely an elephant in the room, which are the Zora stone monuments that refer to Princess Rito, since its inclusion can be read and interpreted many different ways. It reads, "Long, long ago, in a past more distant than even the Great Calamity or the creation of divine beast Varuta, there was a Zora princess named Rito. We know that she was an attendant of the Zora patron deity, and that she was a fair and lively girl, beloved by all. Around that same time, an evil man with designs on ruling the world appeared, bringing disaster upon Zora's domain. It is said that Rito awoke as a sage, facing this foe alongside the Princess of Hyrule and the hero of legend. Her achievements are remembered not only by the Zora, they are forever etched in the history of Hyrule. The divine beast Varuta, built ages later to face off against Calamity Ganon, was named in honor of Rito. That the Zora princess, my sweet daughter Mipha, was chosen to pilot Ruta is surely the work of fate." Now there is a great deal that say that this example can be used in favor of the adult timeline and the downfall timeline, but not the child timeline. That it would clash against it, and they would be right to think so, as those are the only timelines in which Ruto awakens as a sage in real time. However, if you analyze the wording and the statements within the text, it actually may also advocate strongly for the child timeline. It reads, "It is said that Ruto awoke as a sage, facing this foe alongside the Princess of Hyrule and the hero of legend." Funny they use that choice of words when referring to this event, as if this legend was relayed through speech and not truly accounted for in documentation at the time. Almost like if Link returned to the past at the end of Ocarina of Time to warn the royal family of Ganondorf's plight, accounting everything that has happened in the future, including the awakening of the sages, using the Triforce of Courage as proof to his words. Words that obviously had to be relayed to the royal family's allies who were affected by Ganondorf's misdeeds, i.e. the Zoras. If we go a bit further, it is said here that her achievements were remembered. If we really take into account what happens in the Downfall timeline, Link losing the battle against Ganon and forcing the sages into a desperation move that resulted in the loss of the Triforce and led to the bleakest outcome of Hyrule's history, that really isn't an achievement. So with that, this excerpt could be pushed for each of the timelines depending on how it's interpreted. Now let's get into the existence of things in certain timelines. While each Zelda game has fair share of enemies, both new and old, a lot of them retain staple enemies that change shape in almost every title. However, there are certain enemies that people claim that are exclusive to one timeline and use that to advocate certain timelines, which is definitely respectable. One such example is the Lino, which up until Breath of the Wild have only existed in the Downfall timeline, and just the Downfall timeline, not even in the Unified timeline, which is a bit weird. But it is at this point that people want to wrap it up and say, GG, it's over, Downfall timeline confirmed. How about you slow down there, cowboy? We're not finished yet. While we may have other enemies that live to the truth of the timeline in question, such as the Hinox that have existed in all three timelines and never in the Unified timeline, we also have enemies within Breath of the Wild that have only existed in other timelines against the Downfall timeline, such as the Lizalfos that have only existed in the Child timeline that have sprouted from the Unified timeline, and Choo-Choos that are enemies that have literally existed in every other timeline but the Downfall timeline. So when people use the argument about Linos, the existence of Lizalfos and Choo-Choos in Breath of the Wild instantly negate the point and pushes the notion that exclusive enemies from timelines determine Breath of the Wild's placement into a massive stalemate. However, when talking about the existence of things found within Breath of the Wild, we aren't just talking about enemies either. We have to talk about places. One of the most notable is Spectacle Rock, which is something that has only existed in the Downfall timeline. However, in those games, it was always near Death Mountain and not in the Gerudo region in Breath of the Wild. Still, its inclusion is a callback to the Downfall timeline. But at the same time, there are other areas that are of note to other timelines, such as the Temple of Time, which by name have only existed in the Child timeline. But to be fair, its inclusion in Twilight Princess heavily suggests that its eventual decay is where the Lost Wood would lay within the Downfall timeline. But that could be disputed as well, as there's no reason to return the Master Sword to the Temple of Time or even upkeep the temple itself in the Downfall timeline given what's taken place. And then we have the Arbiters Grounds, which only existed in Twilight Princess in the Child timeline. And even going a step beyond that, which is something I don't see talked about very often, is that Eldin, Lunaru, and Faron in both name and regions have only existed in Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, and now Breath of the Wild, which I feel is something that is true exclusivity in timeline inclusions. This even goes along with the Gerudo region and the tribe that have only existed in the Child timeline after Ocarina of Time, and the reasons why isn't hard to see or even think about, as in Hyrule's story, it definitely drives the point home that after Ganondorf's invasion, or attempted invasion, Hyrule's relations with the Gerudo did not sit well, as it reads in the advent of Four Swords Adventures, the relations between the Gerudo village and Hyrule were friendly once more. And this was the only timeline where it seemed like the Gerudo repaired their relationship with Hyrule. So for them to come back in another timeline way down the line and suddenly appear with their culture and kingdom intact in that way seems pretty unlikely. But when speaking about tribes, we also have to look at two glaring additions to Breath of the Wild that have only existed in the doomed adult timeline that really throws the placement out of whack. And they are the Rito and Korek tribes. Although we have some leeway with the Rito, as in the Wind Waker they look like humans with bird-like qualities, while in Breath of the Wild they look like birds with human-like qualities. Think about it, it makes sense. But with the Koreks, nah, they look like they were straight up ripped from the Wind Waker, which adds to the conundrum as Hyrule is flooded and lost with all that makes it Hyrule, which is the Triforce, the Master Sword, and Ganon, who is pivotal to the eternal struggle. Even Hyrule Historia says that it is done in that timeline. The curtain thus fell on the cyclical history of the sacred realm of Hyrule and the struggle of the Triforce. And then we come to the Sheikah Tribe. Now, the existence of the Sheikah Tribe throughout Hyrule's history has always dictated that the tribe is always teetering on the edge of extinction. This is heavily prevalent in the Downfall timeline, as Impa is the only known Sheikah to exist in Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. But if Breath of the Wild is to take place in the Downfall timeline after that, to have the Sheikah be the most thriving we've ever seen, color me skeptical. Now, I get the argument that the tribe that we see in Breath of the Wild could have been mostly Sheikah in name, with a few exceptions like Impa, Pura, Paya, and Robbie. However, the Sheikah have to have been thriving 10,000 years prior to that to build all the technological marvels we see in Breath of the Wild. Furthering that point, for Breath of the Wild to exist as the last game in the Downfall timeline after Hyrule was reduced to that in The Legend of Zelda, and then have gone through a massive technological boom and expansion in land and tribes, is incredibly contradictory to the very name of the Downfall timeline. And with that being said, it is stated multiple times within the Downfall timeline that the royal bloodline, Zelda's bloodline, has been thinned out and resulted in waning power. Yeah, that doesn't look like waning power. Despite everything that I've said, there is something of a theory that I like to add that to me definitely paints the picture of what the issue is with Breath of the Wild's timeline placement. It's a combination of both the grandfather paradox and the multiverse theory, one of which is already employed by The Legend of Zelda, which is the multiverse theory. But I do believe at the point that Link engaged Ganon in that legendary battle for Hyrule at the game's climax in Ocarina of Time, a variation of the grandfather's paradox comes into play, which combined with the notion of the multiverse theory, I want to go ahead and dub the Destiny's Path paradox, in which it suggests that multiple universes and multiple timelines will always follow a predestined path that employs the concept of eternalism, in which all outcomes will always play out in a similar manner, albeit with some slight deviations here and there, but would establish concepts that are shared among each universe that will exist and come into existence, although some will come in different times and be in different places. And this is applied to items, conflicts, places, and legends. I really feel that a paradox like this dictates the path of all three timelines to share motifs that come into existence despite not being in the unified timeline. But hey, shouldn't have Zelda's words at the 19th ceremony be enough to prove this game is in the child timeline? We thought so too, until we played the game and saw all this stuff that clashes. I mean, what was Nintendo thinking? Dragon Break? Whatever. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, leave a like, subscribe, share, and all that good jazz. Be sure to tune in next week as I'll dive deeper into the concept and notion that Breath of the Wild does indeed take place in the child timeline, while ripping MatPat's theory to shreds. I'll have a good friend along with the ride. So until then, this has been HMK. Get hyped, stay hectic, and I'll check you guys later.